The morning sun over Tunisia cast a pale light across the broken ridges north of the Kasserine Pass. Dust hung in the air, stirred by the grinding treads of tanks maneuvering through gullies and shattered ground. German commanders scanned the horizon from their Panzer IVs, expecting to exploit the confusion of another American retreat. But what they saw instead froze them with disbelief. 5 Sherman tanks, scattered across terrain that should have severed all lines of communication, moved with uncanny precision. One advanced, another covered the flank, while a third angled into perfect position to cut off retreat. It was as if a single hand guided them. No signal flags were raised, no flares cracked through the smoke, no dispatch riders dashed between machines. Yet the Shermans acted like a living organism, each crew anticipating the other's moves as though bound by an invisible thread. To the Germans, trained under rigid doctrine, the sight was incomprehensible. Their own radios crackled with static, voices drowning beneath engine roar and interference. Only command tanks carried transmitters, and once they were hit, entire platoons collapsed into silence. By contrast, the American formation surged forward with eerie unity, as if guided by some unseen force. A German officer muttered that it seemed supernatural. How could these crude, lightly armored Shermans behave like predators circling their prey? The secret was not in thicker steel, nor in a larger gun. The Germans believed their superior engineering would dominate the battlefield. But that morning they confronted an advantage they could neither see nor counter. Invisible waves sliced through the chaos, clear, unbroken voices carried from one tank to another. The Americans had unlocked a weapon more decisive than armor, the power to connect, to coordinate, to fight as one. The story of this invisible advantage began not on a battlefield, but in American laboratories and factories 2 years earlier. In July 1941, while German panzers thundered across the steppes of Russia, the United States quietly standardized a new family of radios for its medium tanks, the SCR-508, SCR-528, and SCR. Each unit would become the beating heart of American armored warfare. At the center of this revolution stood engineers like Daniel E. Noble and Henryk Magnuski of the Galvin Manufacturing Company, later known as Motorola. Noble envisioned that frequency modulation, or FM, could solve the persistent chaos of battlefield communication. Magnuski, a gifted radio engineer, overcame the technical nightmare of fitting delicate electronics into the vibration, heat, and dust of a moving tank. Together, they forged a link that would reshape war. The leap from amplitude modulation to frequency modulation was simple to describe but profound in impact. AM radios, like the German Fuji 5, struggled to filter out battlefield noise. Every spark plug firing, every engine turning, every electrical discharge created static that garbled messages. German tankers often heard more interference than words. By contrast, FM radios carried voices with clarity, cutting through noise as if the battlefield itself had fallen silent. Where German crews strained to hear faint commands, American tankers spoke in crisp tones that traveled miles without distortion. This difference meant more than just convenience. It altered the psychology of combat. American tankers, once vulnerable and scattered, now fought with the confidence of knowing they were never alone. Orders, warnings, even encouragement flowed freely from machine to machine. Meanwhile, German tankers, isolated by their faulty radios, fought as individuals, blind to the larger battle. One side felt connected, the other profoundly alone. When American armor first rolled ashore during Operation Torch in November 1942, few could have predicted the transformation about to unfold. The Shermans landed near Safi and Fedala carrying the new SCR-508 radios, their antennas rising like quiet promises above the dust. Within weeks, these radios were tested under fire, and by February 1943 at Kasserine Pass, the world saw what they could do. The battlefield was a nightmare of smoke, shattered vehicles, and confused units stretched across 50 miles of North African terrain. German tactics thrived on disorder, expecting American columns to splinter once contact was made. Yet amid the chaos, something strange emerged. Scattered Sherman crews who had never met before coordinated as if drilled together. One tank spotted a German ambush and relayed the warning. Another redirected artillery fire within minutes. Squads miles apart advanced with synchronized precision, striking where their comrades could not see. German commanders, reading intercepted signals, were astonished. The clarity was unlike anything their own radios could manage. Even more unnerving, every American tank seemed capable of transmitting, not just a chosen few command vehicles. German doctrine, built on a rigid hierarchy, faltered. Once a Panzer platoon leader was destroyed, easy to identify by his cluster of antennas, the rest of the formation dissolved into silence, reduced to hand signals and guesswork. At Kasserine, the Germans claimed tactical victory, but behind the statistics lay a revelation. The Americans had fought not as scattered machines, but as a network, their voices binding them into something greater than the sum of their steel. German intelligence scribbled reports, noting unusual coordination, yet dismissing it as training. They had no idea that what they witnessed was only the beginning of an invisible revolution. In 1943, the war shifted to Italy, where mountains and valleys promised to cripple radio signals. German commanders assumed the rough terrain would reduce American coordination to the same chaos their own units endured. Instead, FM radios proved even more valuable. Signals bounced across ridgelines and through valleys where German amplitude-modulated sets failed completely. American tank platoons separated by sheer cliffs moved as though the mountains were transparent, launching attacks with precision that stunned their opponents. What should have been an obstacle became a proving ground, revealing that the invisible American advantage grew stronger under harsher conditions. By June 1944, Sherman tanks poured onto the beaches of Normandy. Their radios linked them to naval fire support, a feat impossible for German armor. Yet the bocage, dense hedgerows lining every lane, revealed a critical gap. Tanks and infantry fought on different frequencies. More than once, infantry watched helplessly as German soldiers with Panzerfausts crept close enough to destroy American armor. The solution was ingenious in its simplicity. Crews welded field telephones to the exterior of their tanks, connecting directly to the intercom. By Operation Cobra in late July, this modification transformed battlefield communication again. Infantry whispered warnings into phones. Tanks responded with instant bursts of fire. During Operation Cobra, over 200 Shermans surged forward, coordinated entirely by radio. What should have been a chaotic melee became a deadly ballet of steel. German defenders, including elite Panzer Lehr units, faced an enemy that seemed to think and move as one body. The irony was brutal. Germany had pioneered tank radios in the 1930s under Heinz Guderian, yet by 1944 they were years behind. Panthers, feared for their firepower, became prey to Shermans less armored but infinitely more connected. American superiority in communications was not just a matter of clever engineering. It was the product of industrial might on a scale the world had never seen. By the end of the war, over 50,000 SCR-508 radios had rolled off American assembly lines, enough to equip every one of the 49,000 Shermans produced. In Germany, fewer than 6,000 Fuji-5 transceivers were built, a number so small that only select command tanks received them. The difference was staggering. In American units, every Sherman became a node in history's first true battlefield network. In German formations, most tanks were mute, fighting blind without the ability to call for help or report threats. This network was more than wires and frequencies. It was a lifeline. American crews fought with a sense of connection, each man knowing that dozens of unseen comrades were only a call away. Even when a Sherman was isolated by smoke or terrain, its crew never felt abandoned. Contrast that with the Germans, whose tankers often fought in silence, isolated in steel coffins, cut off from the battle swirling around them. The Battle of Arakourt in September 1944 laid bare this truth. American forces faced German Panthers and Panzer brigades with superior armor and guns. Yet Shermans, bound together by radio, spotted enemy movements, relayed coordinates, and directed tank destroyers onto targets they couldn't see themselves. Artillery fire arrived within minutes of a report. Over 3 weeks, American units destroyed 281 German armored vehicles while losing only 41 Shermans, a kill ratio of nearly 7-1. Still, German intelligence refused to accept that radios made the difference. Reports credited rigid training discipline and good radio manners, never realizing they were witnessing a technological chasm they could not cross. By 1945, the invisible advantage of American radios had reached its zenith. When the Ludendorff Bridge at Remagen fell into American hands, word traveled by radio in minutes, and entire divisions shifted to exploit the opportunity. German forces, relying on telephone lines already shattered by Allied bombers, stumbled into piecemeal counterattacks. Days later, in the Ruhr pocket, hundreds of thousands of German troops were encircled as American armored columns coordinated a double envelopment entirely through radio. What should have been a desperate German stand dissolved into confusion, units cut off from each other, commanders unable to issue orders, soldiers trapped without direction. For American crews, the difference was psychological as much as tactical. Even when separated by miles, they never felt alone. A warning, a call for fire, or a word of encouragement was always in their ears. German tankers, by contrast, often fought in silence, isolated and blind. The battlefield became a lonely place for them, a series of disconnected struggles. For the Americans, it was a chorus, each voice linked to the next, weaving chaos into order. The lesson was not lost after the war. The rebuilt German army in the 1950s made communications a priority, every Leopard tank carrying radios as standard. Nations across the world copied American designs rather than their own. Modern conflicts would prove the principle again. In 1991, U.S. forces with superior networks crushed Iraqi units armed with individually superior Soviet tanks. In 2003, American troops once more demonstrated that a connected force defeats a stronger but isolated one. German troops never knew it was the Sherman's gun that won, it was the invisible voice inside every tank. Connection meant survival. Isolation meant defeat. That truth defined 1945, and it still defines war today.